I was 12 years old the first time I ever used a chemical that could change my brain. My mother had purchased a 6-pack of fuzzy navel wine coolers. These were bright pink carbonated bottles of wine and sugar water that tasted not far off from what an orange soda might have tasted like back then. The benefit was that they were alcoholic. I was unaware of this, but I was still fascinated with them because they had a smell that no orange soda on the market could, or to this day does, match. They smelled eerily like actual fresh oranges. I surmised that they had orange zest or pith ground up and blended into the liquid itself, but for all I know, the scientists at Bartles and James had isolated the orange smell chemical and created a fully synthetic version. Whatever their secret was, I wanted to taste the drink more than anything else, and after some minor probing, my mother relented and said I could have one. It tasted fine enough, though nowhere near as good as it smelled. I drank about half of it before my father took it away after watching me make an exaggerated swaying motion. I'm not sure if he really thought I was intoxicated or if it was the surreal nature of seeing a child acting out such an adult activity that made him question whether it had been smart for my mother to provide me with the stuff in the first place. Potentially, I suppose it could even be that he was just being an asshole. Whatever his motivations for seizing my wine cooler, I don't think I got much out of that half a wine cooler even if I was only 12. Next, at age 13, I tried cigarettes. I had an older friend who himself had an older cousin. This older cousin was a smoker, and for some reason that year he was having trouble getting a hold of cigarettes. I'm not entirely sure why, because as far as I understood it, he was 19 years old, but I think maybe he had no car, which combined poorly with country living. The older cousin's solution to his problem was to break a piece of his own property and then blame his younger cousin for it. Then he would tell his younger cousin to steal enough cigarettes to make up the cost for this destroyed property, and this resourceful younger cousin would make the cigarette problem go away. I don't think my parents were our only target, but I think they were our primary target. I'm not entirely sure what motivated me to do it to them so aggressively. I think part of me hated that they smoked and halfway hoped that when they finally caught me doing it, they would be horrified into quitting. I think it was a couple of weeks of stealing cigarettes 1 pack at a time from open cartons before my father finally set up the family camcorder in the living room and pointed it right at the cigarettes. I remember seeing the camera and knowing it was there, and still grabbing 2 packs and running away back up the stairs to my room to hide them. I'm not sure why I did this, only that it was the last time I did it. That night, before they confronted me about my theft, my friend and I walked out to go and count the cigarettes and tally their value when compared to the value of the item that was destroyed. Then, curious what my parents and his cousin were so eager to have and so desperately protective of, we opened a pack and took each one. We sat on a rain-molded hill of hard clay underneath the stars with our cigarettes and a shared lighter. We each lit our cigarette in our hands rather than our mouths, letting it burn like a candle for an instant before blowing out the flame and gazing at the glowing orange embers. I sucked on the filter for about half a second before inhaling and instantly beginning a coughing spasm that shook me from head to toe and left me with my eyes watering and my throat burning. I got away better off than my friend, who ended up vomiting in the ditch next to the road and then again in my bathroom back at our house. My parents confronted me about the theft as soon as he was gone, probably because they couldn't believe he'd been involved in the theft. Up until this point, he'd been such a straight and narrow, very religious sort of kid, and they didn't want to get him involved. I confessed everything, and I don't know if anything came of it for him or his cousin other than that they grounded me and stopped leaving their cigarettes sitting out. I know I certainly didn't want one anymore. Because of my unpleasant experience with that cigarette trying to smoke that night, I wouldn't try smoking again for 6 years, despite halfway through that interval discovering a distinct passion for anything that could change my mind. Which puts me at just about 16 when I finally get my greasy little teenage paws on something regulated by the DEA rather than the ATF. It was just before my 16th birthday when I fell into a habit that I think a lot of my fellow outcast peers probably also got into at that time. I got on the internet and lied about my age on internet relay chat servers for local meetup groups. Mostly these were populated by college kids and the occasional middle-aged or older person. They were almost all high school or college dropouts who worked in blue-collar fields and spent the vast majority of their time taking new kinds of drugs and playing a pen-and-paper role-playing game called Shadowrun. If you're not familiar with Shadowrun, it's a world where dystopian sci-fi themes of cyberpunk storytelling a la William Gibson exist alongside Tolkien-esque fantasy creatures in the near future of our modern world. So you could have an elven wizard with a mystical ancient staff who also takes a vacation to Detroit every summer for the Woodward Dream Cruise to drive around in his classic 1980s Pontiac Trans Am. Naturally, I loved this because it's really fucking cool. I was desperate to play this game with these people, and the lengths I had to take to make it happen were absurd by modern standards. First, I would have my parents deposit me with a friend. That friend would have his parents deposit us at the shopping mall in the nearby town, where I would pretend to be getting off work and needing a ride home from one of these older people I'd met on the internet. They would pick me up and bring me to their house, and while they were setting everything up for us to play Shadowrun with their friends, I would begin a carefully coordinated CIA-style disinformation campaign via several carefully placed phone calls to my parents and the parents of my friend, the final goal being to invent a narrative in which I would show up at home at just the right time and be left unsuspected of any wrongdoing. At this early juncture, I don't think I'd even actually done anything wrong, just met with older teenagers and 20-somethings to play dice games. Still, I think because my interactions with these people were based on a lie, I wanted to keep my life with them separate from my life at home whenever possible. Once I was done deploying my impressive operational security scheme, I would return to the living room of this trailer where my college-aged friend lived with his ex-girlfriend, and sit down for a nice 4-hour session of Shadowrun with him, the aforementioned ex, and 2 others. I think they all knew I was lying about my age, but thought I was lonely or something and took pity on me. Once I learned the game, though, I became much more welcome to them. You see, I can make funny voices. I have a very good imagination for it, and sometimes I have a knack for getting the pitch just right and the pronunciation just wrong. This makes role-playing, which is essentially tantric acting, much easier and more fun. It also makes the made-up characters I create a little bit more believable. Lucky for me, I'd edged out of my dark, gothic phase and entered the sort of teenage nihilism that I only wish had been a bit stronger. This meant I was lucky enough to not want to create these over-the-top heavy metal tropes of characters with one red eye, or one feathered black angel wing, or an outfit covered in spikes, and the other mindless drivel that seems amazing when you first discover it. Once I got settled in, I made myself a friend to these people, and before the end of my junior year's first semester, I was helping out these college-age kids with breakups and job trouble and giving them advice. Aside from being in way over my head, the one way I was alienated from these people was that I didn't smoke marijuana. They would roll a blunt every time I was there to my memory. I cannot think of a single time they did not. No one would ever tell me I had to smoke it, or that I wasn't cool if I didn't. There was no real peer pressure like the DARE officer said there would be. They would just roll it up and then pass it around. Nobody would say anything when it arrived at my side, and I would unceremoniously pinch it around the middle and hand it to the person on my opposite side without comment. Neither would they complain when I simply stuck out my hand in a warning motion to repel them from passing it to me. Still, I was keenly aware that there was something everybody else in the group did that I did not. The person I got along with most in the group was a bit older than the rest. A woman of 28 years who was finishing a master's of some kind that had to do with radio engineering, if I remember correctly. She and I managed to somehow have our own in-jokes, even though we only ever saw each other in this group setting. I also think we had a very similar relationship with our parents, her mother being the sort of person my father was in a lot of ways. I got her phone number from the host of our group and called her up one day to confess everything. We stayed on the phone for hours talking about what kind of hormone-enriched pain I was going through thanks to puberty and what kind of stuff she went through when she was my age. I told her that I'd never done drugs and only had sex a few times, and that while I liked everybody in our little group and got along well with them, I felt out of place. I asked if she might let me come over to her house to smoke some cannabis, just the two of us. My thoughts were that in this setting, I could feel safe and see how much of a fool it made me. Worst case scenario, I'd simply have her advertise to the others that she and I had smoked together, so they would know I wasn't a complete prude. She asked me to bring a list of things I hadn't done with me, and maybe we could try some of them together. I tried marijuana first. It gave me an odd, twisting sensation in the sense that I could remember everything I was doing while I was doing it. The next thing I tried was rum. That I actually liked a lot. I credit that woman to this day for not turning me into the kind of teenager that gets wasted and vomits everywhere. I can only remember one occasion where I got that drunk in my entire life, and it was many years later. Somewhere along the way, these trying things sessions sort of became more intimate. For instance, shortly after the rum I tried receiving oral sex. It feels way better than marijuana, but my knees buckled very early in the process, and I tumbled over so forcefully that I still have a faint scar on my member today from her teeth digging in. And over the next year, this woman showed me just about everything on my list and introduced me to people who would show me the rest. We even developed a few things to try together. I dabbled with uppers and downers, barbiturates, marijuana, speed, diviner sage, anything I could get my hands on. Every intoxicant seemed to bring me one step closer to something I felt I'd been looking for a long time. That thing finally that gave me the fix, the real fix, was opium and all of its cousins. To me, there are only really a few different types of marijuana. Opioids are not like this. Heroin alone has many subgroups with their own quirks. The sort of off-white powder you're thinking when I even say the word heroin is just one kind, China white, the sort you usually see in movies. Pain pills are even better. Percocet, OxyContin, hydrocodone, Tylenol 10, Lortabs, Norco, you name it, there is a mood of mind to fit that flavor. The main draw of opiates to me was not that they treated my physical pain, but that they treated my mental pain. Taking an oxy was to suddenly feel not ugly or awkward, to not be obsessively worried with things that weren't important, to not be scared of failure, to not compulsively give up on everything I wanted to try. It didn't make me feel arrogant either, just normal for once in my life. I think even now that I'm missing some chemical in my brain that opiates tell it to produce, which normal people just have. Yes, at higher doses, I admit that I would become the slack-jawed wastrel often illustrated in media about heroin addicts, but I should say that it was never my intention to take doses like that. For years, I used opiates even after I didn't see this woman anymore, and I always showed up to work on time and worked just as hard when I was using. My employers had nothing but good things to say about me. But let's go back to this woman of mine. This person who introduced me to this floating world of chemical ecstasy. She and I became so close that I thought I was the luckiest 16-year-old on the planet. I would skip school or pretend to go see other friends just so I could run off to her house to sit in bed smoking and making love. We would watch classic films and listen to old records from before we were born, try and figure out how to dance, eat huge plates of spaghetti, and then start all over again with another bowl of weed out of her marbled glass pipe. We eschewed ideas like love, though I think I must have been in love with her, and tried to explore the world together. I think she liked me for 2 reasons. First was that I did not judge her. I was so lame that there was no way I could think anything she did was lame, since I came from a place of confession in the beginning anyway. Second was that I was too young for her mother, or so she thought. She never told me this, but I came to discover that her mother had a hobby of seducing her male friends and sleeping with them behind her back. That more than one of her boyfriends when she was a teenager had cheated on her with her own mother. I can imagine why she wanted to keep it a secret. Aside from the fact that she lived with her mother, it was also not exactly something to be proud of. I suspect that she chose to become attached to me because I was a chubby, awkward, and patently unattractive kid who was so young that even her mother would have had to throw aside her standards to find me attractive. What I suppose she failed to consider was that her mother had a compulsive desire to be just as good as her daughter, to feel like she was still just as valid and attractive. Having given birth at 15 and taken a job in a factory shortly after, raising 2 daughters on her own was hard for my lover's mother. I think she often felt like she had nothing in her life but her 2 daughters, and everything was for them. Whatever the reasons for her behavior, if you are a 16-year-old boy and your very attractive friend's very attractive mother comes into the kitchen in a bathrobe and offers to let you see underneath, suffice to say, I think I was too stupid to realize I was anything other than just a lucky boy. I wish my lover had told me that her mother was off limits. We both slept with other people while we were together, and it never felt odd or wrong, and even after I slept with her mother, my friend tried to stay amicable with me, but it was obvious once she found out about it that I'd lost my luster to her. And I know this sort of behavior sounds so stupid as an adult. If you were to place me in my 16-year-old shoes, I would have so much more to say and so much less to do. I was not at that time preoccupied as I am now with the motivations people have for doing things, especially things that benefit me so much. I only hope that in the intervening years since that time, the woman I used to love will have forgiven me in her heart or forgotten me in her mind. After all, I have her to thank for my love of opiates. It's been about 10 years since I took a pain pill while I wasn't sick or recovering from surgery or an injury. Just knowing there's a substance out there that can make me feel normal is a relief. I like to feel like I'm saving the use of it for when I really need it for that special project. Knowing I'm even capable of feeling normal is sometimes enough to help me push through a complex situation or a stressful life change. Despite all of that, I do often wish I could go back and love her differently. I won't mention this woman's name since I've described her committing various felonies, including statutory rape, and as far as I know, she is now happily married in a city far away from the one we knew each other in. If she ever stumbled upon this somehow, though, I think she would know who she is. I think our friends would know, too. And just in case that happens one day, let me say this. My dear, you were my true opiate. I hope you're happy wherever you are now.